This is the last hop garden in Marden, in the parish of Marden. When I was about 10, so about 40 years ago, there were over 100 growers. And this little piece, this 3-acre plot, is the last piece of hops in the parish. Normally hop picking, when we had 50 acres, so back in 1970, early 70s, used to take a month. We'd have 2 gangs of 4 people working in the hop garden and about 8 or 9 people working in the hop picking shed, and then we'd have 4 workers and a hop dryer in the oast house. And that took about 4 weeks to harvest that lot and pack it, dry it and pack it. Now, 40 years later, the last little patch of hops in the parish takes a day and a half to harvest. We have 1 gang of 4 people in the hop garden, plus another extra tractor driver. We have about, again, still about 7 or 8 people in the shed itself. There's nobody in the oast house. The people in the shed load the hops in the evening at the end of the first day. They have cold air blown through them overnight. Lunchtime the second day, the remaining hops are loaded. They're then dried overnight, and then whoever is available comes and helps the hop dryer, Trev, Simmons, press them up into the pockets on the afternoon of the third day.
Here we are, the 12th of September 2007. Just started picking our long vine organic target hops, the only hop garden in the world like it. The procedure is done with a vine puller, which is one of the most modern ways of gathering the harvest now. The vines slide down a tube onto a feeder cog, onto a blade which severs them, and the chain goes round a tyre which grips the vine and then pulls it. And where there is 3 staff working on the trailer, 1 feeding the vines into the cutter and 2 straightening the vines on the trailer. This procedure for this hop garden started in April when the string went on. The string is a produce of Sri Lanka, and then they was trained. That means that vines were trained up the strings late April, and then because they're organic, the only thing we can use for disease is a copper spray, and the feed is liquid seaweed. To get a heavier crop, you really want to put very fine vine up, which is, and an old saying is, May vine is the best vine. If you put rank vine up, which is very pipey, the laterals are further apart. We used to go rank vine pulling, pull all the rank vines out, so you could train the finer vines up. And then a modern way of doing it was to burn them off with tar oil. But as tar oils have been banned now, that's by the way. But as this is organic, we don't do any of it. You know, we don't rank vine, we just put rank vine up and fine vine. And that determines how heavy a crop you have. The little pots up on the post are homes for the predators where they overwinter. There's it's just a lemonade bottles, cola bottles with corrugated paper in, and the lace wings go in the corrugated paper. And the reason for this is because if you have a really cold winter, the lace wings overwinter in the hedgerows, And when the dams and op aphid comes in, they're in the edge rows when we want them in the op garden. So as we have them overwintering in the op garden, they're on site when they're needed. Now, when I was a boy, a long time ago, I used to go ham picking, and the procedure was to pick the ops with not too many leaves, because they'd make you pick the leaves out. And I used to pick, when I was about 10, I used to pick 8 bushels a day at 10p a bushel. In the olden days, when it was all ham picking, the bin would come down the alleyway, and they would have two hills each side of the bin, and the bines would have been pulled manually, and they'd sit on the side of their bin on the rail, and the hands would be the hops would be picked by hand. Once you had done your 4 hills, you could move up to the next 4, but not until you've picked all your loose hops up on the floor. You used to be measured out twice a day, and that was where the measurer came round with his bushel basket, and he would measure out a bushel and tip it into the poke, and you'd put 10 bushels in 1 poke. Some of the varieties we've grown here are bullion, WGVs, which were whitbreads, Bramley Cross, which was OT48s, Challenger, Pride of Kent, and years ago, before I started here, they would have been Fuggles. Now this is a hop eel which has 4 strings to it, and you train 3 bines up 2 strings and 2 bines up the other 2 strings. You train them clockwise, they go round with the sun, unlike runner beans which go anti-clockwise. When you would pick your bine clean, you would roll it up in a ball and place it on top of the heel, where that would stay until probably January, February, and then it would be cut off, leaving about 6 inches of the vine poking out the ground. And then about the beginning of February, middle of February, you would plough and leave a slip. You would plough 2 furrows away from the heel one side, 2 furrows away from the heel the other side, which would leave what we called a slip, and then you hoed round the heel and dressed it, which meant cutting the dead vine into the white growth and leaving it a bowl shape. Now while you was doing this procedure, if you cut a vine, which you cut white, if it was cut brown, you would mark it, and that'd have to be grubbed out, because that might have been the first sign of wilt. This is a hop eel, and it's known as a heel because in the olden days it was earthed up. It could be earthed up to 3 foot high. This is a screw peg, which is just like a corkscrew, and that's where you hook your strings under. So you come down and go up, and you come down and go up. That means you've got 4 strings, and you would train the two bines up one string and 3 up the other. Probably you'd do 2 this side and 2 that side, and 3 this side and 3 this side. In the winter, when we went op dressing, Although we don't go op dressing now, they're just cut off level with the top of the grain, so there's no owing to do. You see that vine's cut in white. You not only had your main bines coming up, but you had what we called little runners, which would strike off sideways and just come up under the grain, so you had to make sure and cut all the runners off. Now, because the technique we have now, where we just cut the bines off level with the top of the grain, the heel plant itself is spread, whereas when they was dressed properly you would contain it and it would probably only end up about 10 inches across. This is more like probably 18 inches. This is pelletized shoddy, which has a nitrogen, quite a high nitrogen content. That's how we feed, but what we've put on this year won't really come into benefit until next year, when it's rotted down a bit. It holds a bit of moisture in as well. The last time I did this, I got 8 shillings a hundred. No weed control now with weed killers because they're organic. So the way we keep our weeds down is cultivation through the summer. Although this year I couldn't cultivate because the ops have been strung a bit different, whereas we used to have them strung on an upright basis like that. They've been strung on the slant, so I can't get through to cultivate crossways. In 1956, the op picking machine was installed, so that meant that we no longer had the Londoners come down for the op picking. But before 1956, this would have been their accommodation. And in this row there are 7 operats. This is a doorway in, there would have been another doorway there. And they're roughly 6 foot by 8 foot. And they would have had a bed in the back, right across the back, probably a little table, a couple of chairs. If a large family came down, they'd probably take up 2 or even 3 huts. The bedding, which would have been at the back, along here, probably had a straw mattress or some form of straw with a cover over it. And in odd places in these you can see where they had the candle, and they'd put them on there to get into bed, and if they went to bed drunk, they probably forgot to blow the candle out. So the candle used to burn down and nearly set the hut alight, especially as you had a straw mattress as well, so it was a bit, could have been a bit dodgy. And of course the other thing was sanitation in those days, when a lot of London children died of diphtheria. I think it did have a concrete floor, but as you can see the rabbits have been excavating in here, so this is now rabbit hutches. A lot of the London hop pickers, because they come from London, I think they was a bit frightened of the countryside, so if you had an hailstorm or rainstorm at night on the tin roof, that might have been a bit worrying for them. And also when they come back from the pub, they was always in good voice singing. I think that they thought they would keep anyone away from them.
We reached a maximum, I suppose, of 50 acres of hops in about early 1950s. Since then, that remained at 50 acres until about 1973, 74, 75, round about then. And gradually from there on in, the market, we joined the EU, or the European Economic Community as it was then. The Hops Marketing Board, which was had complete control over the marketing of the English hop crop. It balanced the demand from the brewers with supply from the growers. Every grower had a quota. If you grew your quota, that's what you were paid on, cost plus. If you grew more than your quota and you wanted to pick the hops you'd got, there was demand. You could buy quota from growers who hadn't got quota, hadn't grown their full amount. Otherwise, you simply left the hops that weren't required to hang in the breeze. So the hop growers made good money. The brewers were always guaranteed of their hop supply, and everybody was happy. Then European regulations came in. Mandatory marketing bodies were abolished, and from there on in, the industry has never really recovered. It was always cheaper to grow hops in China or America than it was to grow them here. Alongside that, the days of heavy industry in the north of England, the workers in there consuming 10 or 12 pints of low alcohol beer on the way back from the pub just to put the fluids back, obviously disappeared as the heavy industry died.